Hi, I'm Phil Meeks. I'm an extension agent for agriculture and natural resources with Virginia Cooperative Extension in Wise County. And I'm going to talk with you a bit, we're going to go over a handful of wild edible plants, some things that you may encounter on a hike or any other time, hunting trip, or sometime you're out in the woods, out in a natural area. And to give you an idea of where I'm at today, I'm in Pound, Virginia. And if you see the mountain on the horizon back there, that's Pine Mountain. So Kentucky is the other side of that. So we're just a few miles from the county line here in Wise County. One very nice wild edible is going to be our common milkweed, and this is it in bloom. A lot of people know this is very good for pollinators, but it is also a good edible. Not to be confused with some of the dogbanes like hemp dogbane, which is toxic. But the common milkweed can be used in a number of different ways. And one thing about the milkweeds is when you break that stem, it does have this milky sap that will show up. And that sap, that sap is bitter, and that sap is mildly toxic. But once you boil this, then it is going to be safe to eat. A good way to use the milkweed is to collect the young shoots in the spring, and you can cook those like asparagus. Now, if you're not familiar with this plant, it can be hard to recognize when it is just a young shoot. But if you look in an area like this, where you see a lot of milkweed, and you take note of that this year, then next spring you can go in and should be able to find those young shoots when they emerge. Another way this can be used is the young leaves can be boiled and eaten a lot like those young shoots can. Some people will take the flowers, they'll boil the flowers, and then they'll dip them in a batter and make fritters. Now this is a little bit too far gone, but that can be used. And then we'll get a seed pod, a young seed pod, and when that's young, when that first comes about, that can also be used, boiled the same way as some of the other parts of the plant. So the common milkweed is a good one. This is one that you're going to find in forest edge situations or in openings. You'll notice we're in a power line right away right now. That's where you're going to find this most commonly, also along roadways, in pasture fields, hay fields, along trails and along roads. But that's the common milkweed. This is a plant that I've noticed a lot of sources have started to caution people not to use, even though traditionally this has been used a lot. This is pokeweed, poke salad. A lot of us in Appalachia, including myself, we grew up eating this. It's a weed that you see in waste places. But it does have some toxins. The toxins are throughout the plant, but they're especially concentrated in the seeds and also in the roots. But you'll also find that toxin in the stems and in the leaves. So if I was going to use poke salad or pokeweed, I would use it when it's small. You can harvest it when it's about 6 inches tall, and you can use it like asparagus. You can harvest the leaves at that time and use it as a cooked green. But that toxin is really nothing to mess with. I do know of a person in this area who wanted to show how safe it was to eat poke fruits, poke berries, and ended up in the emergency room. So don't mess with that toxin. And some people, like I said, will choose not to use this at all. But if you're going to use it, especially you would want to collect it before you start getting that red color in the stem, because that's when the toxin seems to be more concentrated. Okay, now we're in the woods, and I do want to point out some younger pokeweed that's growing along this new trail. Pretty abundantly, very small, and this is the size. If you were going to make the choice to use pokeweed as a food source and manage around those toxins, this is the size I would recommend looking for. It's a very immature plant. You see there's not a whole lot of reddish color showing up in the stem. So this is the size that I would suggest looking for if you're going to use pokeweed as a food source. Okay, I want to do a stop here because there are several wild edibles just within a very small area that we could talk about. But this one that's in bloom, this is one that could be used for teas. This is in the mint family. And the mints you can recognize because when you roll that stem around, they're going to have a square stem. But this is one of our native monardas, related to the bee balm, the red bee balm that you may grow in your garden. Bergamot is another name, but this can be used. You can collect those leaves and you can make a mint tea out of those. Another one that's close by here, and one that I'll point out, a lot of people may not realize that it's edible, but the wild geranium that blooms with such a nice blossom in the spring, the young tender leaves are edible. You can eat those. You don't have to cook them. You can eat those right on the trail. And then here's one. This is a native legume, this vining plant here. This is called hog peanut, and I hear it gets its name because lots of times people would let their hogs run loose in the mountains, and this is a plant that was a favorite of those hogs. But if you've ever grown peanuts in a garden, they will send out a structure that will go underground once the plant is up, and the peanut forms underground, and this does something very similar. It will send out a shoot, it'll go into the soil, and you can dig up that legume and eat it from this plant. But that one's hog peanut. Then another one that I'm seeing over here, very, very common. This is greenbrier. There are several species in this genus, the Smilax genus. You may know it as sawbrier or catbrier, greenbrier, but these young tendrils are edible, and even the young tips of the plants, which looks like the deer has already beat me to that one, but these young tendrils are pretty nice trail nibble that you can just pull off and eat while you're hiking. You don't have to prepare those in any way. You can just eat those raw, but they have a pretty nice pleasant taste. I'll mention some trees that I would classify in the wild edibles category, and the first one here, this is eastern hemlock. Eastern hemlock is in the pine family, and like other trees in the pine family, you can collect those young needles and you can steep them in some hot water and make a nice citrusy tea. The tea is high in vitamin C, so that's a possible hot beverage that you can make from a native plant. And a question that I get a lot when I mention that is isn't hemlock poisonous? People know the story of Socrates being sentenced to death by drinking hemlock, and that hemlock is a completely different species. It's not a tree species at all. We do have the poison hemlock in this area, but it's a herbaceous plant that you'll see in pastures and along wet areas. The hemlock tree is not toxic, and you can make a tea out of those fresh needles. Another tree that, and just like the pokeweed, this does require a little bit of caution, and this is a small example, but it does have the 3 leaf shapes, so this is the one I want to look at. But this is sassafras. Sassafras will have the leaf that looks like a mitten. It'll have a leaf that looks like a turkey foot or a 3-fingered archery glove, and it'll have the plain entire leaf without any lobes. Sassafras is, and the caution about sassafras is it has been proven to be carcinogenic. So that's something to keep in mind. A lot of people will avoid this, and I wouldn't blame you if you did. Probably be a good idea to avoid this, but just want to mention this as a possible traditional food source that you may have heard about. Of course, the sassafras tea is made from the roots, so you would dig up the roots of some small sassafras trees or even mature sassafras trees and boil that root bark, and you get that nice root beer flavored tea. Another way that this is traditionally used as a food source is people will collect the leaves of sassafras in August, and they'll hang that up and let it dry. And when those leaves have dried out, they'll crush that up into a powder, and that powder is known as filet. You may have heard of filet gumbo, but sassafras is the seasoning in filet gumbo. And the other trees I want to mention, I want to talk about our oaks, because we're talking about wild edibles. We do need to talk about oaks. And we have a couple of dozen species of oaks here in this part of the world. But they can all be divided into two groups, the red oak group or the white oak group. The red oak group, including northern red oak, scarlet oak, black oak, they typically will have pointed lobes on the leaves. Those I would avoid as a food source because the acorns are going to be high in tannins, they're going to be very bitter, and it's going to be hard to leach enough of those tannins out to make the acorns edible. The white oaks will include our regular white oak, post oak, chestnut oak. They have the rounded lobes, and they also have tannins in the acorns, but not quite as much. And it's possible to take those acorns and boil them in several changes of water. The first boil, that water will be very red, and then you change the water, you do it again and again until that water turns out clear. And then at that point, you can take the acorns and you can use them like you would peanuts. You can roast them, you can chop them up, and a lot of people will even grind those acorns into flour. The thing about the white oak acorns, and I want to show you this large white oak, they can get very large. This is a boundary line tree behind me, that's a white oak. So if you can identify where one is, it's going to be easy to come in and collect the acorns beneath that. But the thing about the white oak acorns is they do provide a lot of calories. A pound of white oak acorns will provide about 2,000 calories. So that can be a useful wild edible, although it does take some preparation to make it usable. Okay, this is a unique one. It's known as sweet Sicily, or sweet anise, or sometimes wild licorice. And all parts of this plant are edible. It has a really fine white bloom early in the spring, and this time of year you'll see those seed pods. But all parts of this, as I said, are edible. This does have a nice licorice flavor to it, so you can just break off those leaves and pop them in your mouth on the trail. These will occasionally get big enough that you can use the stalks as sort of a celery substitute. So that is the sweet Sicily. If I had to pick my favorite wild edible, it would probably be this one. This is Indian cucumber. And this is not a great location for Indian cucumber. There's a few scattered around on this bank that I'm looking at, but in richer woods, you'll find much bigger examples of these. And these will always have just one or two tiers. You'll have this swirl of leaves that'll come up, and then when it's mature, there will be a flower structure that comes up with a flower on the top of that. So if you've got multiple tiers of these leaves, then you're not looking at Indian cucumber. But this is one here. I am on private property, not public lands, so I'm going to harvest this one and show you the part that you would eat. And it's the root, and it has Indian cucumber for a reason. Okay, this is the root of the Indian cucumber that I just dug up. This has a texture and a taste. It's very similar to an actual cucumber out of the garden. So very nice edible. So what you do with this, of course, is just break off those fine feeder roots and scrape off as much of that soil as possible. And it's a pretty nice little trail nibble. So that was just a sampling of some of the wild edibles we have in this part of the world. And you'll get a feel for what kind of habitats these things are located in, whether it's a lawn, a garden, a wooded area, wet woods versus drier ridges. So what I would recommend is, if this is something that interests you, to start out slow, learn 5 or 6 new plants per year, and start using those slowly, because even though it's technically safe to eat, doesn't mean that you know how your body's going to react to a new food. So just start out slow. And I would also recommend a good guidebook, and for me, my favorite is Peterson's Field Guide to Edible Wild Plants. That's a good one to start out. Lots of good information in that, but there's some others on the market too. So good luck with your wild foraging, and hope to see you next year.